Great. Okay. Thanks for having this really nice little background that I could use for my presentation. I did retire after 38 years of preparing professionals and more than 40 years of work in and with schools on implementing MTSS. For those of you that have hung in all day to hear the content of this set of webinars, hallelujah, but I've hung in there. We began implementing these things that evolved into MTSS in 1979, 1980. So before probably most of you were born. And over the years, it's evolved. It's evolved from, you know, the labels have changed, the understandings have increased, okay? And we've learned a lot, okay? And what I would like to be able to do is share some of those lessons learned in terms of what we need to be able to do this stuff well, okay? I got about 15 minutes to be able to do this. Let's see if I can leave you with a couple pretty vivid takeaways. A couple of the things at the beginning are going to be redundant from my secondary session. I won't spend very much time on them, but I'm sorry for that, but you never know who's going to be at one and not at the other. Okay, there's the session description. These are all in the handouts, which you should have in a PDF document, 1 slide per page. Okay, all right, so we don't need to go through my professional credentials. I've had an opportunity to work in it's 44 states. There are a few that have yet, although I guess I can now claim Maine, since I did a webinar with them. So that would actually be 45. So I've been around, needless to say, old, experienced, etc. I have a disclosure statement. Every presenter should have clear transparency. So you can read this. I don't need to go through it, but you know, nobody really, no publishers pay me to say stuff. So I've sent you some key readings, okay? And I'm going to highlight a couple of them. This is from a guy named Gary Gurman, who really began this stuff as a director in a rural co-op, I believe, of 7 districts in Minnesota. And they started changing things in like 1979, 1978. And this is the smartest guy I've ever met in American schools. This is a letter that he wrote under the to his staff upon his retirements, but it really was a pretense. The whole thing was a pretense to share some wonderful thoughts. I built a beginning teacher ed class around this article, and every school psychology student I've ever taught, which is well over 200, has read this article, and nearly all of them say it's one of the most influential things they've ever read. It's easy, it's powerful. I would also encourage you to read the copy of the preface of the last NASP intervention book that Gary Gurman wrote. This guy is so smart. He built implementing MTSS and tied it to the Wizard of Oz. Okay, now that's unbelievable. You can figure out who's the cowardly lion, who's the person without a heart. It's really good. Now, a couple other things that I did with Dan Reschle and Frank Gresham. You've got a copy of that to read, which is a little bit of history, okay? And then some things that with Hill Walker, one of the most influential people in the field of special ed, especially around behavior support, that talks about evidence-based practices, including efficacy and effectiveness, okay? And then a list of resources I've compiled on the science of reading, okay? We'll come back to that in the part of the presentation. Now, there'll be a bunch of things on my website, okay? markshinn.org. It's not a commercial site. There's no ads. You don't provide any information, but you know what? You can follow the instructions and you'll find a lot of articles on professional learning, okay? Content stuff on research-based stuff, okay? Now, in the first session, I went through this and said I described myself as young, idealistic, naive, and I'm no longer young, gang. But the things I say are done with a sense of idealism, naivete, and I hope a little bit of passion, because this work obviously is important. But we have to be idealistic and naive. We're talking about behavior change, gang. And if we haven't seen how difficult it is to change people's behavior in the face of a pandemic in the last, 2 years, think about things changing stuff in schools. Okay. So I will be, very skeptical about a lot of things that we currently do under the banner of MTSS. So here's my big ideas. Go away, light bulb. Big idea here, number one. Here's what MTS is. It's not what people think it is. Okay? It's not. We've over-engineered it. We've made it too complicated, too time-consuming. We've played into all the people's fears. It's not what people think it is. We have to take a step back and say, what do we want to build? Okay? What do we want to improve? What do we want to abandon? We all need to have an abandonment list. What are we not going to do anymore? I worked with a school district that had an abandonment list, and every time they accomplished getting rid of something, they rang a bell. And it was wonderful to ring that bell and say, we're not doing this anymore, so we can do this, okay? Proactive design. Let's take a step back. It needs to be time, cost efficient, and powerful. I see a lot of people doing a lot of stuff to deliver a weak intervention. Hoop jumping, meetings, time, and the intervention ends up being really, really, really weak. Not because people don't care, but because they haven't been exposed to things that actually make a difference. And then here's a phrase that comes from business. Michael Schmoker's been using it a lot. We need to focus than obsess. It's better to do a few important things well than a lot of less important things poorly. Okay? So let's focus and then let's obsess about a few things and get really, really good at it. Okay, so lots to talk about. And again, at the end of the day, my goodness, if your head is not full, okay, just tilt your head, put your finger in it a little bit, and maybe it won't come out the other side. Let's see if I can leave you with 4 or 5 things. It's not what people think it is. This is, and again, I know that George spoke this morning, and this was a powerful piece written by George and others, okay, that was done by disseminated by the National Association of State Directors of Special Ed. And this was radical, gang. What they did, of course, is they put academics and behavior on the same page, which is really good. They needed to do that. These are hand in glove, complementary. You can't just do one or the other. And they identified tiers, okay, of increasing intensity. Great. But as we have learned in the 16 years since, and from experience, here's what people have implemented. That a kid is struggling at tier 1, and you have a problem-solving team talk to the teacher and talk about what they do, and then we send the teacher back, and they have to try 2 things and come back, okay? Now, I know I'm being overly simplistic, but I've seen this, okay? You have to fill out forms too, you got to do that. And then if that doesn't work, which almost always doesn't work, look, I've got this 5th grade kid who reads at the 1st grade level. What do you want me to do with that? Okay, there's no 2 things that I know that I'm going to be able to do to fix that. So now we have another meeting, the kid goes to tier 2 and we need more information. Why we need more information, I'm clueless, but the process starts again. And if the kid fails there, that 5th grade kid who reads at the 1st grade level, tier 2 is probably not going to be appropriately intensive enough to solve that problem. So now, okay, let's have another meeting and let's go to tier 3. Oh my goodness, the spinning circle goes even more slowly, more data. Like, why would we need even more data? Well, we need to figure out what a kid knows and doesn't know. We need to test the living daylights out of them. No, we don't. And then finally, if that doesn't work, kid gets to go to the promised land. The promised land is special ed. And pretty much once that kid's in that system, that 5th grade kid who reads at the 1st grade level may need special ed, but what the heck are we doing in the meantime? This is what it looks like to too many people. Whoop. And I'm thinking my video is not going to play.
Good afternoon. Welcome to our team meeting. We need to discuss how Jimmy is doing in school.
Yes. Let's discuss Jimmy.
Let's make sure we discuss him for 45 minutes so that we don't have time to discuss any other students.
Agreed. Do we have an agenda?
Heavens no. We will just discuss Jimmy until we run out of time. This is the sign of an effective meeting.
Agreed. Do we have all team members here to discuss Jimmy?
We do not. His teacher is busy and cannot attend.
Wouldn't she be an important person to have at this meeting?
Probably. Well, let's get started.
What about the school psychologist?
He is busy scoring 7 IQ tests.
Wouldn't he be an important person to have at this meeting?
Probably. Well, let's get started.
What about the special education teacher?
She's busy scoring 3 Woodcock Johnsons and cleaning up the seclusion room that a student vomited in.
Wouldn't she be an important person to have at this meeting?
Probably.
Probably. What about the school principal?
She's busy scheduling other meetings.
Wouldn't she be an important person to have at this meeting?
Probably. Let's get started.
Agreed. What do we need to discuss regarding Jimmy?
He is struggling with his academics.
In what area specifically?
Yes.
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 How do you know he is struggling?
I have a work sample.
You have a work sample?
Yes.
A work sample.
Yes.
A work sample. What does this work sample indicate?
He is struggling.
In what academic area is he struggling?
Yes.
What is the work sample a sample of?
It is a sample of his writing. It is hard to read his writing. Let's put him in special education.
Because of his work sample in writing.
Yes.
What interventions have you tried?
We have tried many interventions.
Such as?
I moved his seat to the front of the class.
To help him with his writing?
Yes.
I wouldn't imagine it would help him improve his writing.
Precisely. He didn't get better in reading or math either.
Now, I know that this is a parody, right? And when I work with school staff, a lot of people laugh because they have seen these things. Me, if this is what we do is talk about a kid, okay, with not really good data, not a good data system for 45 minutes till we run out of time. I don't want to go to those meetings. I got stuff to do. Now, this is not what MTS is in 2021, okay? It is not RTI, put them in special ed. It's not problem solving and talking about single students. You've got an elementary school of 300 kids. Let's say, 15 to 20% of them have learning needs. Are you really going to talk about 40, 60, 80 kids during the year? Oh my goodness, that will not work. It's not referring individual kids to a team that tells teachers, try 2 things and come back. Look, if a kid needs something, they should get something. Why would we have a teacher fill out a form starting with the kid's name, their grade, their birthday, which is even weirder, okay? And then lots of paperwork and hoop jumping. And go through all of this stuff, and that is a way just to get kids into, ultimately around special ed. To me, that drives me crazy. So we're going to do things differently. We're not going to do this stuff anymore. Let's take a step back. Let's talk about the lessons that we've learned, okay? Now, this is a little bit from the secondary session, but it also is critical that we differentiate between a system and a process. And I really want this word system to be emphasized, okay? Now, this is what we do for everyone, okay? Our social emotional learning. I'll give you an example for behavior in a second. This is what we do for all kids to help them grow, be successful, and, develop in a positive manner. And for those kids that need early intervention, we're ready. We're prepared. We're not going to make stuff up. after we identify a problem. But we do all of this stuff for all of our kids. RTI is a process. It's what we do for some kids, okay? It's a part of MTSS, but it's a small part. And it's what we do for some kids because this is how we identify kids for special ed as SLD. We do not do the ability achievement discrepancy model, which is immoral. We do not do cognitive patterns of strengths and weaknesses for which there's no evidence. We don't do that. We focus on a process of their response to what we've done as part of MTSS. Now, a system. There's a word in there, system. Google defines it as a set of things working together, okay? A set of things, not just one thing, working together, not one by one, as part of an interconnecting system. Wow, what would that kind of look like? A system for who? Well, it's a system for students, right? Of course it's a system for students. You know, the takeaway is I had about 5 minutes at a board meeting at a district about 90 miles from here, and they said, talk about MTSS. You've got 5 minutes, 2 slides. And here's my takeaway. We're building a system where students get the services they need as soon as they need them. That's my one thing that we take away fast. What are we building here? A system where students get the services they need as soon as they need them. Wow, that's our goal. We got a move-in kid. I could screen that kid tomorrow. I could decide with a grade level team what level of intervention that kid may need on a Monday, and we could have that kid in an intervention certainly by the middle of the week or the end of the week. If we have good data and a system set up based around things like triage, kids get the services they need as soon as they need them. But you know what? It's a system for teachers too. And hardly anybody talks about that. It's not just for kids. It's our opportunity to sit back and say, what do we, and I mean we, as a system, need to do to make the difficult job of teaching a little easier? See, teachers should get the services they need as soon as they need them, okay? Because guess what? If I've got this 5th grade kid who reads at the 1st grade level, and I can triage that kid into a tier 3 intervention, where that kid might be receiving a program like corrective reading, plus a couple other little things that I think are really important. If we can build a system that works that fast, that 5th grade teacher doesn't have to solve that part of the problem. We're not moving the problem. We've got a system for that. But we're not saying this teacher has to do it all by themselves. And if that kid improves a lot, that kid will be easier to teach. So this big idea, we're going to now take a step back and say, what do we have in place? What do we need to what do we need to build? What do we need to improve? Okay? Proactive, and we're going to sit down and start with what we have and see where we go. Let's just take an example of how I might flesh out a multi-tier model for behavior supports. What am I going to do with my core? Well, especially at the elementary level, I'm going to do a validated social emotional learning curriculum that should provide some education about what kids might do to become respectful, etc. And I'm going to do some method of behavior support, whether it's PBIS, as part of my motivational system to combine these things to create a nurturing environment. That's my tier 1. Okay, I've got my plan. I'm going to do this really well, and I'm going to ensure that if I see it in the hallways, I'm going to see it in the classroom. In my wife's district, where she's the school improvement coordinator after 18 years as a principal, All of her teachers in the district are trained in Randy Sprick's CHAMPS program. All of them. And everyone is building around Randy Sprick's foundation to not just do classroom, but to build it out in the school, on the playground, on the bus, in the cafeteria. Tier 1, proactively designed professional learning aligned to that, coaching, and encouragement and acknowledgement. Okay, so what do we do at tier 2? Well, you know what? Tier 2, if I'm K2, I'm going to use an intervention called First Steps. Probably the single most researched intervention for very young kids with acting out, externalizing, and adjustment issues at the primary grades. Low cost, high effectiveness, tons of research. I'm going to use maybe Randy Sprick's Connections program, which is now Connections Plus, to provide a variation, a more powerful variation than check in, check out, which I also like a lot. I respect a lot the work of Rob Horner, George Sugai, etc. But I'm going to have something in place. And finally, for those kids with significant challenging behavior, I may now do a behavior plan, okay, or a more intensive check-in, check-out, or for anxiety and depression for older kids, I may have manualized cognitive behavior therapy. All of these things in place. If I don't have them, I'm going to build them. If I don't want these, I'm going to find others. But we're going to proactively design them. We're going to use our professional learning with coaching and support to do it and do it well. Now, let me just give an example about First Steps. You can see on your handouts that this is just an example of the research that's published around the First Steps program. Okay, not to be confused with Second Step. But here you got What Works Clearinghouse, which is just one of 2 groups that have acknowledged the research on this stuff. Why not build it if it's low cost, easy to implement, and long-term results, including up to 3 years of duration in terms of its effects? Now, that's just one example of proactive design. It's a system of supports for teachers that commits to, and if we're not willing to do this, then why are we doing MTSS? It's to make sure that teachers have the tools in the toolbox. So when I work with a group, we would be doing this as choral responding. What do you get if you're part of a system for teachers? You get better tools. Now, I worked with a district that shall be unnamed that was under state control. Teachers were building their core reading program with Teachers Pay Teachers and Pinterest. Those are not the tools that we would use to be able to get kids off to a healthy start and reduce the achievement gap. But tools without training will not be used very well. It is hard to learn how to do stuff. My son is 35 years old. My second kid in the family now that's been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and he just got a pump. And he is really smart, okay? Philosophy major. He's had training a little bit on how to manage his pump, but he can't do it. Thank goodness his younger brother, thank goodness, also has been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 10 years ago and is knowledgeable and skilled with his pump. My oldest son is contacting my middle son probably 3 or 4 times a day now, asking questions about how to use his pump. And here's the other part, that we're trying to create a system of supports where people acknowledge the efforts of what they're doing. That it's a system that requires acknowledgement that people are working hard and doing a good job and learning, okay? That this is what MTSS provides teachers, making that difficult job of teaching a little bit easier. Because you know what, if kids are in a positive school climate where they're more respectful and engaged, teaching is easier. And if kids are getting the intensive interventions they need as soon as they need them, they're going to be easier to teach. And if we can put things like high leverage, low cost, and research-based instructional practices, most of us have not been taught how to teach. We get our degrees, we get student teaching, we go into the field, we might learn from our supervisor, we learn from our peers, but we have not had the appropriately intensive intervention or instruction that all of us need to become better teachers. So, proactive design. Let's just take an example of how a system could work. Who delivers tier 2? This is an important question. See, you could ask the general ed teacher to deliver tier 2. You could. Now, do you think all teachers, most teachers, some teachers want to do even more work than they're already doing right now? You'll find some people are willing to do it, but are they have the time, expertise, and tools to be able to do the intervention with intensity to reduce the kids' needs? Now, guess what? It's the easiest way to do it. It's cheap. Well, how about if we did this? That we actually did flexible skill grouping across classes within a grade. We could do far more differentiated instruction. We could have some general ed teachers doing less core and more tier 2 intervention with a good program as a supplement. We could do that. Doesn't cost any more money, but someone would have to think as a group that we could do this. Well, we could also go really crazy, and do flexible skill grouping across classes, across grades. I really like this model for differentiated instruction. I think it's really great, but I don't know that I need to do that when I've got some other options. I might do this and more, but now we're still not dumping it on just the teacher. See, a school could decide we're going to do before and after school intervention. What if 1 in 3 kids that needed intervention could manage this? I think it's worth doing. Will everyone be able to do it? No. Would I put it in my toolbox? Sure. Each of these things have advantages and disadvantages. I'm not endorsing a single one, but I will push you for my last one. Hey, we could do some computerized interventions. Some of them are good. I don't like them so much with really young kids. I don't think they should be the only or primary tool in the toolbox, but this is me. We could create what in Tennessee they call skinny blocks, where everyone does intervention by cutting back on some things and provide a universal intervention period. Okay, it gives us the time and structure. The challenges, of course, is it may not be enough time for kids with serious intervention problems, and not all of us are skilled at doing intervention. But what about this? What about the central decision makers, our central office staff, administrators, principals, superintendent, directors of programs, sit down and say, we're going to coordinate. And our tier 2 is going to be Kumbaya. Our Title I, reading specialists, EL, highly trained professionals are going to be our tier 2 service providers. At the primary grades, they'll be using, let's say, reading mastery. At the intermediate grades, they may be using corrective reading. I'm just using these as examples, but we're going to train this group and provide this for teachers as well as students, instead of saying, number 1, teachers have to do more. That's proactive design, just one example. Let's avoid doing this. Let's make teachers feel we're supporting them as well as supporting students. Now, time and cost efficient. Here's my takeaway. Every minute away in a meeting is a minute away from intervention. Every minute is a minute away, okay? Instead of having problem-solving teams, I like to have my grade level teams do the heavy lifting. What do I mean by that? My grade level teams with contributions from the school administrators, school psychologists, speech and language, our tier 2 service providers, would look at the 5th grade data collectively. We're going to look at all of our data in our data system and say, these are the kids that need tier 2. These are the kids that need tier 3. I don't need to talk about every single kid. I can identify the kids that need tier 2 and tier 3 with a team. I can do that in less than an hour. I would move from doing this at the beginning of the year to doing this at the end of the year. So every teacher knows from day one which kids are going to be in which intervention. That's a topic on screening that we can't go too much into in depth, but I'm going to do this as a group. Our grade level teams with administrative support and targeted help are going to do the heavy lifting. They will review progress monitoring data once a month for kids at tier 2 and tier 3. And if kids are not responding to an intervention delivered with fidelity, now we'll talk about individual students. Yes, we will talk about individual students who may not be responding to a tier 3 intervention. Then our problem-solving team would meet. But we're not going to problem solve individual kids one at a time, starting from the general ed classroom, if at all we can avoid it. I've got a kid who's acting out and okay? I could bring that to the team. We could collect a little bit of data and say this kid needs check-in, check-out aligned to our school expectations. Okay, we know what those are. Now we're just going to collect data and provide feedback to that student with motivation at the end of each period. That's our tier 2 intervention. This kid needs it. I don't need to sit down on it. Let's do an FBA. Oh my goodness. An FBA on every single problem that gets identified. Look, Jack Fletcher has this wonderful phrase I like that's called, let's teach first and test second. And then only if we need to. So I need to make our meetings more efficient. Our school improvement teams. We have a school improvement team that talks about tier 1. And tier 1 is not just about individual kids, it's about our groups. Look, if you've got more than 25% of your kids that qualify for free and reduced lunch, your kindergarten and 1st grade general ed classrooms probably need an oral language supplement. That's tier 1. That's my school improvement team. How are we doing on implementing PBIS? We look at our data. That's our school improvement team. We use our systems-wide data and say, how are we doing as a school, as adults, okay, to meet the needs of our kids? We reduce the amount of time testing kids. Oh my goodness. For adults, every minute testing is a minute away from teaching. Now, how do we solve that problem? Well, we have the computers do it. Oh my goodness gracious. Here's what we do. Did you know that every minute a student is being tested, they're a minute away from learning? Now, I make my living on assessment. I'm a data and assessment person, but we are doing way too much MTSS assessment. We're doing a lot of diagnostic testing. Every kid doesn't need to know what a kid is good at and bad at. We don't need to do that on every individual kid. And we certainly don't need to do it multiple times during a year. Now, I want to come back. I'm an assessment person. But every kid, I got a high performing 2nd grader, I don't need to know how well they do on nonsense words and this and that and that and this. I want to know how well they do on an oral reading test. We have way too much data and underutilize the gorilla. The big gorilla is an oral reading test. So, you know, we come back to this. Let's reduce the amount of testing. And think about this. The World Health Organization, in terms of their recommendations for screening, Also repeated in the National Research Council and Institute of Medicine, screening should be easy, quick, affordable, and reasonably accurate. We don't need to know everything to know that this kid needs intervention. Jack Fletcher has this wonderful phrase, screening should be time and cost efficient, and here, I love this, not burdensome to teachers. Our data system should be lean and mean, and we should get really good for a while at a couple things. Just a couple. Now you can do more if you want to. That's all your choice. But for me, I want a maximum use of a few really important pieces of data. And it goes something like this. We've known for 40 years, if you want to know how well a kid reads, listen to them under standard conditions. And you don't need to listen to them for a long period of time. Okay, 339. These are a comparison of some of the measures across Ames Web Plus, Dibbles from Acadians, Dibbles Oregon, Easy CBM, FastBridge, iReady, measures of academic progress. Look at all the data we could collect. Let's see, in Acadians, we can do this, 3, 4, 5 things. In Ames Web Plus, we can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. These are all really important things, okay? Really important things that some kids we need to be able to drill down on. But every kid, we don't need repeated measures on all of these things. Now let's take a look at what is in common for all of these measures, or at least most of them, and that's a simple oral reading test. Let's get good at it. Let's use the data. This is Billy reading a 4th grade passage. Billy's in 4th grade.
So begin, start reading aloud at the top of the page. Read across the page. Try to read each word. If you come to a word that you don't know, I'll tell it to you. Be sure to do your best reading. Are there any questions? Okay.
It's a pretty good competition. I feel it probably knowing it was a best one at my school. After I'd read a few times, I was important to start reading it out loud.
Now, I'm not going to have you listen to a full minute. When I work with teachers, especially intermediate grade teachers, I ask them to raise their hand when they heard enough to be able to say that Billy probably needs some help. And I stopped at the point where almost all the teachers raised their hand. It doesn't take long to find kids who need reading help, but reliable, valid oral reading tests, a few minutes, can give us a picture. This is an old Ames Web graph, okay? Green would be average range, orange would be below average, blue or below that orange line would be well below average, and a grade level team, that blue dot is Billy. Billy is well below the 10th percentile. A grade level team would look at these data and look, if this kid's at or around, don't get rigid on this, if they're at and around that below average range, consider tier 2. This is called triage. No hoop jumping. Billy, our tier 2 intervention is probably not intensive enough. Billy would just be hoop jumping. My pet peeve is when I hear this question, how long does a kid have to be in tier 2 to get to tier 3? Look, if a kid is severe enough to need tier 3, why don't we triage him into tier 3? Billy, a grade level team with administrative support, should triage into a tier 3 intervention, and we should know what we're going to do. Another one of my pet peeves is when we, with all good intentions, our intervention is a little of this and a little of that and a little of this and that. You know what you get for outcomes when you do a little of this and a little of that and a little of this and that? You get a little of this, you don't get much. The evidence is pretty clear. A comprehensive program that goes together produces better results than combinations of individual things. What we want is a recipe, not just a haphazard, well-intentioned collection of ingredients. We want things that people have put together and they taste good. So in my handouts, you can see that I've got a recommendation that you could use to scale back our assessment at the elementary grades, okay? And we would have a similar plan to scale back significantly at middle school. And at high school, we would focus on things like individual screening, not collective screening or universal screening. But if we scaled back and used our data really, really, really well, think of the intensity of intervention we could provide. So here's big idea number 4, coming down the home stretch. Focus. Do less than obsess. So we start with this idea. You can't solve large-scale problems at tier 2 and tier 3. When I see schools that say we've got 70% of our kids in the yellow and red, first, you should already know that. You should know that you've got a high-risk population, probably, with high proportions of kids that have not had a lot of experiences and opportunities. They enter school behind in their oral language and life experience. We've got to backfill that as soon as possible. And that means we do this. We've got to flip the triangle and focus on what we're doing at tier 1. Because MTSS begins with powerful tier 1. And sadly, the 2 most frequently used reading curriculum are not research-based, and they're not benign. They teach strategies that make kids almost inoculated against good reading instruction. Read the accompanying materials that I included for you. Because here's what we know, and look at the date of this, 2001. If we just do business as usual, okay, that if we've got kids at low risk, the blue line, or high likelihood of reading success, and at risk, if we just do business as usual, we're going to get that gap. The gap gets bigger. But if we use a research-based program, okay, guess what? We're going to be able to take a niche out of that. Now, notice it's not enough, but that improvement right there is worth doing. Now, is our core program research-based? What does a research-based core program look like? Well, how about if we look at things like the Institute on Education Sciences? They'll tell us what we need. These are the 4 recommendations for foundational skills. Explicit instruction in academic English, phonemic awareness, phonics, and reading connected text with practice and corrective feedback. These are the components. And in fact, we have so much science now about reading, most summarized in Mark Seidenberg's outstanding book, Language at the Speed of Sight. And certainly the work of Louisa Moats, who I've had the honor and privilege of working with in a number of different situations, including a class action suit on behalf of parents. Moats says this: people are just trying hard, okay? But we're using ill-informed, ineffective reading practices. That's what we do as the norm. It's nobody's fault. People are doing what they were or were not trained to do in their teacher ed programs. The code-based instruction is seldom the focus in the early grades, and that's wrong. Now, we know not only what to do for tier 1, but we know how to increase the intensity of our tier 2 interventions. Do less than obsess. So we want to obsess. What are the features produced by the struggling readers? Same thing in math, by the way. And same thing in middle school and high school. You'll find documents that talk about what we need to build and the level of evidence to be able to do it. There's a prescription out there. If only we would follow. Let's obsess on the things that are essential for secondary. Produced by Michael Campbell, Borman, Joe Torgerson, Salinger, Kroll, etc. These are the components that should be part of what we do. Do less than obsess, because guess what? If we do just the core and don't obsess about what we do at tier 2 and tier 3, look at what the research would show if we had a research-based core and appropriately intensive intervention. Look at it. We can reduce almost all of that gap. So the big idea is, and wow, 349, unbelievable, Mark. Take a deep breath. It's not what people think it is. It is not supposed to be more work. It's supposed to be different work. It's not supposed to be built on the backs of already overburdened teachers. Or Title I, business as usual. Reading specialist, business as usual. Special ed, business as usual. You can't just ask general ed, middle school English teachers to change. All of us need to change in some foundational way if we're going to build a system. Now notice, in my world, if you haven't figured out, I've given you permission to do less. But what we do is super important. Building and maximizing our data system. Not just wait to collect data and then wait till a kid gets referred, but to actually proactively look at those data and identify our most needy kids, triage them, and improve the quality and intensity of our core programs. 350. All right, here's the before you go slide that's also in your handouts, okay? Our moderators are, I hope are there at 350 and I'm supposed to stop talking.
I'm here, Mark. Eva, did you want to say anything before I move into the closing?
Yes. Mark has offered to do a follow-up session with everybody. So there is a registration link in the chat. That session will be dedicated to Q&A and give time for us to kind of really dissect any of the implementation changes you guys have made in the meantime. So thank you so much, Mark. And it's been a really awesome 2 hours learning from you.
Well, thanks for Branching Minds for enabling me to do this. And the follow-up will be sponsored by Branching Minds, and it's done as a pro bono gift to Branching Minds and the stuff that they're doing, especially their professional learning, which is so essential, obviously, if you haven't gotten that message from what it is that I had to say. So thank you for everybody, and thanks everybody for hanging in. Whoa, for probably a super long day for you guys.
Mark, I also would love to find a way to create a product line of all of the phrases that you have coined and shared with us today. Maybe some coffee mugs with "do less than obsess," maybe some sweaters or hoodies, things that we can help get that message repeated out in the world for folks.
Yeah, well, if you Google it, you'll see a lot of it in the business success community. And then Michael Schmoker, who's really big in school change, has been using that a lot. Because again, we're trying to do way too much and not getting very good at it, especially using data. Yeah. Yep.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. Or is your closing on this one? Or...
My closing is on the same Zoom link.
All right. Well,
so we're just going to transition straight into a closing.
Great.
All
so
right.
I can listen too.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm done sharing my screen, right?
Yes. I think we're all a little bit loopy now at this, at least here, it's the 5 o'clock hour, but after a long day of incredible, amazing information, I think our brains are a bit saturated, at least I know I am. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today for the Branching Minds MTSS Summit. It is our greatest hope that you have found some inspiration, some restoration, some community here today. I have loved every minute of it. I'm so grateful to you all for sharing your time and energy with us. We know how valuable and limited of a resource that is. We also appreciate all of your donations to Project Night Night, and it means the world to us that we were able to do this in service of kids in many ways. And so thank you to all of our session presenters and keynote speakers for the contribution of your wonderful expertise to this event. 2 themes that I have heard across our sessions today. 1, MTSS remains one of the most effective ways to drive positive and equitable outcomes for students across all grade levels and all dimensions of academic, behavioral, and social-emotional learning. 2, the work may seem hard, but often we are making it harder than it has to be. And the presenters today shared so many incredible ways to work smarter, not harder, to reframe the work, to drive even stronger outcomes and further close those gaps, ultimately through small, intentional, proactive steps that go a long way, especially right now when so many folks are really overwhelmed. That message of knowing that those small intentional steps get us far, I think is really welcome and well received. So stay tuned for the recordings and the resources to access the content from sessions you were not able to attend, or the ones that you want to hear over and over again, like myself. They will be released in the coming weeks. If there's any way that we can support your MTSS work, please don't hesitate to reach out to the Branching Minds team. In the meantime, enjoy some networking in the speed networking session. Check out Branching Minds. We are here to answer any questions you have through the chat, through Q&A, at the networking session, at the Branching Minds booth, or even through email. And we wish you the warmest holiday wishes to you and your families, and the best for you and your colleagues and your students for the 2022 year. Thank you so much. That's all I got.